Right. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and that, amen. Guys, it's good to be back in this Bible study and I'm just preparing. Had a little rust on me as I, was preparing, but I'm excited and I'm really excited for Joseph. And I think Joseph is like one of the characters in the Bible that is relatable up until like being able to tell dreams and decipher dreams. Like I think Joseph is extremely relatable because I don't have the dream. I can't like do the dreams, and people ask me about dreams, like in confession or guidance. Like, I had this dream. I'm like, I'm not Joseph. That's the wrong person. But like, I think Joseph is one of the most relatable individuals because his story has like a whole, like it's got the gambit. It's got like the family issues and the strife, which we're really gonna like talk about today. So Joseph faces a lot of adversity, which all of us face in different ways. And his adversity, like it dragged on too for years. Like it wasn't like an overnight thing or just a couple months. Like we're talking about years of his life where he was just facing difficult things that weren't getting better. And he's just kind of a person to look at and say like, okay, well, how did he deal with it? What did he do? And then, I think one of the greatest parts in Joseph's life is the struggle to forgive, which I think all of us, and if you look at myself, like forgiveness is not an overnight thing, especially when we're talking about forgiveness that has to do with really deep roots. And as we're going to uncover today, like Joseph has deep roots. And this was an ongoing process for Joseph at the end of his life. And all of us, like, we have to struggle with forgiveness at some point, like to people that are close to us, people that are not close to us, people that aren't even in our lives anymore. But, the anger that we can harbor towards them can eat us alive. And they have no idea about it, but we're the ones suffering. And so that wrestle with forgiveness is huge. So Joseph, like the story of Joseph, like it has it all, right? But what we're really going to focus on today is, our families, because I think one of the things that we generally get a picture of when we look at, key characters in the Bible, we look at like, oh, they're so nice and prim and proper, and they got it together. And I think Joseph has one of the most messed up family trees, like recorded in history, and like the Bible does not hide how kind of messed up his family is. And I think it's one of the biggest points that like we can relate, because we can all look at our families and be like, yeah, well, I got this cousin and this is what they did. And like, mom is upset at her sister from so many years ago because like, she said Reuben was better than Reuben, and like she just hasn't gotten over it. So like we harbor like the most ridiculous resentments within our families, and it can kind of tear our families apart. And we're always also looking at other people's families, and like, oh, your family, like, they're just so peaceful, like, and they have it together. But the reality is that like everybody's family is messed up, right? Whether we see it or not, the grass is not always greener on the other side. But that tends to be like our perception. And one of the things that like our family, whether we like it or not, like they hand off to us blessings, but they hand off to us curses. And we can all like reflect on like growing up, we're like, I am not going to do that to my kids. I'm not going to do that to my spouse, right? And we swear it, but like at the end of the day, we do the same thing, right? They pass on to us, whether we realize it or not. Like our families and our family of origin specifically hand off to us both curses and blessings, and we can't escape. And I think one of the best quotes that I've heard, that kind of really summarizes this, if you will, harsh reality. It actually comes from Pete Scazzeri. He says, like, Jesus may be in your heart, but grandpa's in your business. Like as much as like we pray and like I'm not going to do this, and like we do good things and we serve and read the Bible and stuff like that, like grandpa is like in our DNA, and he's going to come out one way or another, right? That's what family is. And we have to navigate. Like it or not, we have to navigate our families. And I think Joseph has so much in his family history that he has to navigate, and his family has to navigate. And so before we get into the story of Joseph, I want to dive into his family tree. And so we're going to take like a fair chunk of time to kind of look at the family tree, and I printed it off, and I actually, for everybody online, I'll get the slides up. But it is important for us to look at the family tree and kind of keep this handy, because as we go through the story, you'll want to reflect on like, okay, which son we may be talking about, and so on. So it's good to have this family tree, keep it handy, keep it in your Bible. We're gonna throw it away. Woman's all right. All right. You guys online see the slides?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so we have our family tree. And the family tree that's in front of you or on the screen has 4 generations of a family. Okay, from Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebecca, then Jacob and his 4 wives, and then Joseph pops. So we have 4 generations of the family, and we're going to really focus on these, because within these 4 generations, what we have are just, blessings and curses. We're going to focus more on the curses, okay, just to be blatantly obvious as to like and how messed up the family is, and like when we kind of see how what is passed down through the generations, it helps us understand kind of the first scene in Joseph's, right, which is his coat of colors and gets thrown into a pit. So hopefully, after we kind of look through 4 generations of the family, we're going to be able to look at what happened when he was actually thrown in the pit, to understand like, okay, why was the reaction what it was? Okay, so when we first look at this chart, we're going to look at Abraham and Sarah. I'm going to share a story that everybody knows of, and then we're going to see how it passed down in a very interesting way. Okay, and so when Abram and Sarai first came to the promised land after they left Earth, what was the first thing that they ran into? Settle down, huh?
Good place to stay.
Sorry?
Place to stay, where to stay.
Okay, they stayed in them, they got to the land of Canaan, but then was it easy or difficult? Difficult, okay.
Difficult.
Because there was a drought. So where did they go? They kept on traveling south to Egypt. Okay, so they traveled into Egypt. And as they're going into Egypt, who remembers the story?
Abraham told Sarah to like pretend she was his sister.
Okay, Abraham tells Sarai, like, look, if they know I'm your husband, they're going to kill me to get to you because you're a beautiful woman. So if we go to Genesis 12, all right, verses, we're going to bounce around a lot at the beginning. Okay, Genesis 12, verses 12 and 13. All right, therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see that they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say that you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you. Right? So Abraham lies about his wife Sarah saying that his sister. Okay. Is Isaac in the picture? No. Isaac doesn't come till 30 years later. Okay, so Abram started his descent, I think, when he was 70 or so, and then Isaac doesn't come into the picture until Abram's about 100, when Abraham dies, and then Isaac marries Rebecca. We're not going to get into the story, but if we jump to Genesis 26, all right, let's look at verse 7. Right, this was a situation where Isaac and Rebecca were, traveling. They didn't go down to Egypt like Abram did. They went to another place, but they ran into another rule. And what does Isaac say? When the men of this place asked about his wife, he said, "She is my sister." But he was afraid to say, "My wife," thinking the men of the place might kill me on account of Rebekah, for she is beautiful. It's interesting, right? You have similar situations, the same response from Abraham and Isaac, yet these two situations happen decades apart, right? Which tells us something about just what we naturally inherit from our families, right? This was, I would say, probably learned behavior from Abraham. Abraham was a man of faith, a righteous man, and not to take anything out of him, he's not a perfect man, right? And if we really studied the life of Abraham, we would be able to kind of, pick out some of the finer points in scripture of where like he fell short of it, right? These were one of the situations. But how somebody comes to make that decision is a compilation of a lot of things. Right? How he deals with his wife, how he deals with children, how he deals, with stressful situations, and so on. And so these traits are just handed down, right? So there's this inheritance of traits, blessings and curses, right? Now, when we look at Isaac and Rebekah, right? They had these famous two boys, Jacob and Esau, right? What was Jacob known as? Anybody know what his name translated this? Right? If you were to sum up the story of Jacob, it is, deceiving, right? He's a liar. Jacob was a liar. He lied to everybody in every way possible, right? So what was one of the, the famous, one of the famous stories between Jacob and Esau? Esau went out hunting. He was a man of the field. Jacob was a little bit of a softer guy, so to speak. He stayed inside. Esau came from hunting, so hungry, so tired, felt like he was going to die. And there's Jacob, like, just doing his suit, right, making it nice. And then what is Esau? What does Esau want? Suit, right? What does Jacob do? What's the exchange?
Inheritance.
Okay, his birthright.
Right.
Okay. What's a birthright? And blessing, which he later on steals, are two different things. There's a little bit of overlap, but what's a birthright?
The first born son gets majority of the inheritance of the father.
So it's close, right? The birthright is that firstborn son, okay, but it's more like it's a place of honor in the family, because that firstborn son was a very like treasured position in the family, right? They were the heir if it was like a line of royalty and so on. The blessing most frequently would go to the firstborn son, and they would get the majority of the inheritance, but a blessing could be given to the favored son, right? And the reason why there's a differentiation between them is, if you remember the story, I'm going to try and summarize it. After Jacob deceives his brother to get the birthright, then his father says, okay, go make me a meal how I want it so that I may give you the blessing. So Isaac was still planning to give Esau the blessing, which was the inheritance, majority of the inheritance, right? But then we have this like little shenanigans between Rebekah, right? And Rebekah favored Jacob, but Isaac favored Esau. So even though Jacob stole the birthright or place of honor, Isaac still wanted to bless Esau. But Rebekah loved Jacob more. And so they play this little game where Rebekah goes to Jacob, and right now we're in Genesis 27, and we're going to look at verses 6-8, where Rebekah overhears that Isaac is planning to give the inheritance to Esau. So in verses 6-8 of Genesis 27, so Rebekah spoke to Jacob, her son, saying, indeed, I heard your father speak to Esau, your brother, saying, bring me game and make savory food for me. that I may eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now, my son, obey my voice according to what I command you. And so what she commands her says, like, I'm going to go make the food just like your dad likes it, but you need to go and dress like Esau. And we're going to put the lamb skin on you so that like when your dad calls you in and he says, okay, come over because you sound like Jacob, but he's like, no, I'm Esau, let me touch you, right? Jacob was a smooth man, but Esau was a burly man. So they put the lambskin on so that when Isaac in his old age touched him, he would feel like the roughness, right? And think that it was Esau. So they go through this whole elaborate plan in order to steal the blessing, right? Which was to steal the inheritance, right? And she knew that it was wrong. Because in verse 13, she says, but his mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son, only obey my voice and go get them for me. Right? She knew what she was doing was wrong. So we get this like sense of favoritism in the family that is being passed down. Isaac favored Esau, Jacob, and Rebekah favored Jacob, right? But beyond the favoritism, we also have this, these series of like hatreds and individuals being cut off from the family, envy, and a whole bunch more favoritism, right? So to kind of summarize the story, after all this, Esau wants to kill Jacob. Jacob runs away. We have that famous story of Jacob's ladder, right? That's where that fits into the story. Jacob runs, and then he goes to a relative called Laban, which, anybody remember, Laban had two daughters, Rachel and Leah. Anybody remember the story? It's all coming back like Sunday school. It's just like,
I think you want to marry the older one, or the younger one, you have to marry the older one first.
right. So Rachel was the younger one, and Leah was the older sister. Jacob loved Rachel. So Laban said, okay, work 7 years. So he said, okay, I love her, and we'll work 7 years. Work 7 years, night of the marriage, what happens is that like nightfall, she has a veil on, and he slips in Leah instead of Rachel. Jacob realizes in the morning, upset. He's like, oh, it's okay, but like I gotta marry my oldest daughter first. Right? That was his excuse. And so he said, you want Rachel? 7 more years. Work 7 more years, right? So Jacob dished it out, but he also got a handful. All right. But we see that. We see the cutoff from the family. We see more deceit kind of in this story. I mean, this, like, you can make like a TV sitcom out of this. Full of stuff. Right. And then as they unfold, like in their marriage, finally, when he has Rachel and Leah, right? Jacob clearly favors Rachel to the point that it hurts Leah, right? And to the point that if we go to Genesis 29, verses 31 and 32, look at how Scripture describes this kind of envy and favoritism and kind of hurt that is going on in the family. Genesis 29, 31 and 32. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah conceived and bore a son and called his name Reuben. For she said, the Lord has truly looked on my affliction. Now, therefore, my husband will love me. Right? So now, like, there's like, you have two women who are just like pining for the love of Jacob. And Rachel's love, but she can't have children. Leah can have children. She's probably rubbing in Rachel's face, like, just going back and forth, right? Several children later, Rachel finds like, can't have children, take my maidservant, right? And if you look at the family tree, so you have Rachel, Leah, and then Bilhah, maidservant. So we have 2 kids that way on Rachel's behalf. And then Leah's like, oh, you give her, you want to give your maidservant? I'll give my maidservant. And then Ziplah comes in, the 2 more, right? And then Leah has, I think, a couple more kids, and then Rachel finally has kids, right? And who are the 2 kids? Joseph and Benjamin, right? So Joseph is the firstborn of Jacob's love, which is Rachel. And he receives Joseph in his old age. And then Benjamin is the youngest, right? And Rachel dies, giving birth to Benjamin. So, like, if you, with all the amount of like favoritism that is just bleeding into this family, you look and see how coveted Joseph and Benjamin are, right? And now that we kind of have this backdrop, right, we kind of blitzed through a lot, but hopefully, you know, the story has come up, and there's many other stories in there, right? Now that it's fresh in our minds, right, you can see that there's no way you come out of this family tree and you're not affected in one way or another. You're not pushed towards favoritism. You're not pushed towards envy. You're not pushed towards, being willing to cut off a sibling if they got in your way. This is what the family is for, and this is what was passed down. And so their minds are attuned to dealing with each other in this way, right? So with that, right, Joseph family tree filled with everything you can imagine. But our goal by going through that is to help us understand, well, what happens in the family. But the more important question is to ask ourselves, how well do we know our own families? Right? How well have we studied our family trees to know what is being passed down from generation to generation? And so, like we always do, I'm going to pose some opening questions. And we'll start off light. What are positive ways, right, your family has influenced you? What are the blessings that have passed down to you? And you know what my second question is going to be. All right. So what's a blessing that you receive from your family? Can't focus all on the negative, even though we just did. All right. What are the positive or the blessings that you've received from your family? Call your parents and go, they got nothing good from you. Right?
Well, there's security and support and love.
Okay. Thank you. I'll throw my hat in here. I think for my mom, like I really got this message of like, okay, you fight through things to figure out how to keep the family together. Right? It's difficult, and you want to sometimes like cut them off, right? But you fight through to keep your family, and even if that fight is going to be several years, like that's what you do. That was a blessing we got from my mom. We can't get a blessing. I can't even ask the second question.
I'm reminded when
What?
my mom, after my father passed away, my mom lived with us for 9 years, and every time I'd go to work, I'd say to her, "I love you, Mom," and she said, "I'd love you too, Eddie." And towards the end, she just said, "I just want to go home. I want to go home." And she gave me that sense that, one soul touches another very deeply, very, very deeply. And that's what I took away.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. It's a nice story.
I can share something.
Thanks.
I think something that I got maybe from my dad more is like resilience, like just power through, like just get it done. You can complain later, like just do it. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's like a little bit of both. It's like You just power through everything.
Yeah.
That's-
And that's a nice point that like, sometimes like the good is mixed in with bad.
Yeah.
stuff, right? You can't like tease it out
Yeah.
so clear.
Yeah, I found also that the confessions of parents or loved ones in truth and love are so endearing. My dad passed away very young in his early 60s, but he lived in North Carolina, 10 hours away. And I just was led to go see him over the 4th of July. And he was trying to kind of like repent or give me encouragement from the things that, because he was hard on me, very hard. And not always right, but I accepted it. And the Lord gave me the opportunity to say goodbye to him because he passed away the next month. But he was confessing his soul. It was so deep and so rich. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah. It teaches a lot of things, especially through the hard times.
Yeah, I think they offer a lot of love too, even though sometimes it doesn't line up with our understanding, but mainly do it out of good heart, and they teach you how to stay love others even if they're not good to you. And I think perseverance is another good thing because they mostly keep praying for you if things are going well, or they feel that you're in distress but they can't help you. They'll still do anything they can, even if it's just a prayer.
For the sake of time, we still got a lot to cover. I will say what are the negative things that they passed on. And I'll share. Kind of ask both of you to share and not to share. But like one of the things that I received from my dad, which is again like I think a curse and a blessing. But it was like, okay, when problems are brewing, just sit tight and they will resolve. Right, which is very different than my mom. All right. But it was one of the things that like I learned. And in all honesty, like in some situations it worked, but there are many situations where it didn't work. But that's like, it's what I just learned to do, is to just sit tight, kind of, hunker down a little bit, and they'll wake up or the situation will resolve itself. And, I think I got burned from that stance, a couple times, but at the same time, sometimes it worked. So, and like everybody's got to reflect on their family and really just ask yourselves, like, okay, what did I inherit from them? And even challenge yourself to go back a couple generations. You'll find some wacky things like in your family tree that you didn't know of, that is all of a sudden being passed down to you that you didn't realize. Right? My dad is like the most tight man that I know, and so like peaceful and content. But for one of my school projects, I had to do a family tree. And the stories he was telling me from the family tree, I'm like, you came from this tree? Like, I can't believe it. Like that you evolved from this tree. With what he was saying between cutoffs and divorces and marriage and like stolen inheritance. And so but anyway, like it's cool. And so I encourage each of you to do a family tree for yourself and to kind of explore. Anybody want to share one other thing before we jump in?
I think worrying too much.
Huh?
Worrying too much.
Yeah.
It's a killer because
The Egyptian curse.
they want to protect you, but they're being overprotective, and it kind of develops into your personality, and it prevents you from doing things.
True. That's a good one. All right. Now, family history fuels family feud. All right. Family history fuels family feud. Let's jump into Joseph, and we're going to jump in at Genesis 37. It's really when we get like this introduction, and we're just going to read chapter 37 for today, or as much of it as we can. somebody kick us off, and if you can read the first 4 verses, Genesis 37, 1 through 4. Read loud so that you get into the mind.
Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. And this is the history of Jacob, Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was a son of his old age. And he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him.
All right, great. Let's kind of practice. What family patterns do you see in just these first 4 years?
Favoritism and jealousy.
Okay, you see favoritism, you see jealousy. What else? Envy. Okay, there's envy.
Joseph was a snitch.
Joseph was the snitch. Okay. This is like the little goody two shoes.
Yeah.
Okay. Daddy, daddy. All right.
Anger and hatred.
So anger and hatred. So I really like that because the last part that says they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Like the kid's 17, right? But this is clearly like brewing from years on years. Like for you to get to a point where like I just can't, every time you're around, like I get agitated and I can't speak to you in a calm way. And we all have these individuals that like all of a sudden you start to have a conversation with them and like you're fired up in just a second, right? We got to be asking ourselves why, right? Because it didn't happen overnight and it didn't happen over a gumbo, right? Something big happened, right? Or is passed down, or is like learned behavior because your parents didn't like their parents, and every time they talked about each other at the home, like it was just passed down to you, right? So we all have these things. The other thing I would point out is you see like a bit of like grouping, if you will, right? So Joseph was a snitch, but specifically on Bilhah and Zilpah, those sons. So we're looking at Dan and Naphtali and Gad and Asher. So you see like, segregation within the family, so to speak. And just a point like to throw out there is it is thought that the 2 maidservants could not have been, part of the Israelites. And so their belief system could have been a little bit, we don't know exactly, right? But their belief systems could have been a little bit different. And when you look at, the groupings of the kids, it's not crazy to think that like each kid kind of stuck to their parents, right? To their mother and learned a lot. I mean, Jacob, he was more of a hands-off parent. So they were going to, naturally gravitate to their own mother. So just factor that in of how it makes the gelling of these 12 brothers difficult. Right? So we're going to do verses 5 through 11. 5 through 11. Somebody can read.
Now Joseph had a
Louder,
dream.
louder.
Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear the dreams which I have dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaves arose and also stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." And his brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers, and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream. And at this time the sun, the moon, the 11 stars bowed down to me." So he beholded to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is the dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, and his father kept the matter in mind.
And his brother envied him. But his father kept the matter in mind. Let me ask you this. Why do you think his brothers envied?
Because they knew that their dad loved him the most.
Mhm.
It's like obvious.
Okay, so from love, okay? If your 17-year-old son, and remember, this is a very patriarchal system back then. Your 17-year-old son goes up to your dad and says, "I had a dream, Dad." You're gonna bow down, right? Not just you, mom too, and all the brothers. What do you think the response, the natural response, would be? Be something big, right? That is taken off the belt, the ship, like everything possible, right? But what we get is a soft rebuke. Doesn't it annoy you sometimes when you look at your siblings who do something that you qualify just as dumb as like you've done in the past, and they get a lighter selection, right? It's annoying. But it speaks to the favoritism that was existing in the family. And so, like, envied him, like, I can understand why. Like, the kid could do just about anything, and he just got a slap on the wrist to go into the family and say, like, all of you will bow down, right? It's a big thing, right? We consider it a big thing, even when you look in the New Testament, the story of the prodigal son. When the son asked for his inheritance, he's essentially saying, like, Dad, I wish you were dead. I'll give it to you. Right? It's a big thing. And so just to add fuel to the fire, when he just gets a slap on the wrist, like, it's annoying to all the other brothers. Like, if I were to say that, Dad would have like sent me out of the family. Right? But Joseph gets slapped on the wrist. Something to a different point to just kind of keep in mind is that as you read, if you come across different commentaries, one of the things that you'll see in the person of Joseph is this typology with respect to comparing Joseph to Jesus, right? Because as Orthodox, the way we approach the Old Testament is through the eyes of the New Testament, right? So we see Jesus, who is the fulfillment of all the prophecies, and he makes sense of everything. And so from his lens, we look backwards. And one of the things in that process of looking backwards is seeing different typologies or examples of like Christ in the Old Testament, right? And Joseph is one of the individuals that you will see, and if you dig further, you can read a lot of typology with respect to Joseph being the image of Christ, but in the Old Testament, okay? So a lot of patristic commentary does talk about that, so I do want to mention it, give you some examples, right? So both dreams all bow down to Joseph, right? In the end, who's the only one that everybody will bow down to? It's Christ, right? So we see a bit of typology, right? Even the greatest, which was within this family circle, Jacob was the greatest, but he bowed down. So we look and see, like, even in the world, those who we consider the greatest will all bow down, right? And also in this verses, what we see is actually in the upcoming verses, we see Jacob sending Joseph to go check on his brothers, right? And some of the commentaries will point and say, like, well, this is similar to the father sending the son to check on us, right? So the incarnation. So those are just some examples. I want to throw it out there as we move forward, just because it's good to see passages from different angles and to train ourselves to see it from different angles, right? We gain a lot more from scripture. All right. Let's move to verses 12 through 15.
And his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." So he said to them, "Here I am." Then he said to him, "Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me." So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron and he went into Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, "What are you seeking?" So he said, "I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks." And the man said, "They have departed from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan.
All right. Read one more verse.
Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him.
Thank you. So just to, I guess, reemphasize that point of typology that we see, Ambrose of Milan, one of the church fathers, he was digesting, this idea that the brothers were in Shechem. And Shechem is a name which means, or it's interpreted as like shoulder or back. So it's essentially, he's saying like, it's a term used when somebody turns their back on something, right? Or doesn't go. And the quote that I have up here, I'll just read from Ambrose of Milan. He says, "And he sent him to Shechem, which name is interpreted as shoulder or back. That is, to those who did not turn to the Lord, but fled from his face and turned away, an expression properly applied to a sin," right? So when you look at like this context, with regards to typology, you see that Joseph is being sent, and clearly the brothers are being labeled as the sinners, right? And so in the incarnation, the Lord was sent to the sinners, right? Joseph was being sent to the, his brothers who were in Shechem, or people who had turned their back on, right? And to add to that, because he didn't find them in Shechem, he found them in Dothan. And Dothan is another meaning. Now, Joseph found his brothers in Dothan, which means this desertion, right? Or to desert something. And where is the person who deserts God? But in desertion. So, quote is interesting, but essentially what Ambrose of Milan is, what he's painting out is this picture that like Joseph is the image of Christ. He is going and he is meeting his brothers, but they turn their back on God. And then those who continually turn their back on God, essentially like he's saying like they've reached a level of moral depravity, right? And that's, somebody reaches only that level when God is not in it, right? So just kind of, some symbology to go along with these verses. All right, but now let's get back into the family feud. Let's look at verses. We're going to take a big chunk, but I'm going to ask you guys a lot of questions about this chunk, so pay attention. And as we're reading it, I want you to be thinking, what is everybody's motivation? A lot of people do a lot of different things in these verses. I want you to be thinking, what is motivating them to do what they do? Okay, so we're going to read verses 19 all the way to 28.
Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit. And we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit, which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that they might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father." So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt.
All right, great, thank you. So there's a lot of events evolved, right? So Joseph is coming, thrown in the pit, wanted to kill him, like wanted to save him, wanted to make money off him, like a lot of events happen, right? And so I want to go through, I'm going to spit out a character, and I want you to think based on the verses that we just read, ask yourself, like, what is the motivation behind what's happening? Right? So let's look at Joseph. We'll start off easy. What was Joseph's motivation for going to his brothers?
So his father reports his father.
Right? Yeah, I mean, this is pretty simple. Like his dad said, go check on the brothers and let me know what's happening. Okay, so he's fulfilling the wish or instruction of his father. And at the beginning, he was a little snitch on his brothers who weren't doing well in the field and wanted to please daddy. Right? Now he's pleasing daddy again by going and following the way. All right? A little bit different. What was Joseph's perceived motivation by his brothers for the visit? What? Yeah. Okay, I'll say it again. All right. What was Joseph's perceived motivation by his brothers for the visit? So what did his brothers think Joseph was coming to do? And he said, say it again.
He thought he was going to tell them more dreams.
Right? Yeah. And why do you say that?
They call him a dreamer.
Yeah, they call him a dreamer. It's like, oh, the brat is here. Right? What's he gonna say? Right? Tell us about his dream again. Right? Is he coming to rub it in? Right? There's a perceived motivation. There's actual motivation, perceived motivation, which they're different. Okay, and obviously, like, we're speculating. Okay, I can't concretely tell you this is exactly everything that they were feeling, but I think if we understand the family situation a little bit better, we can postulate together, okay, what are the motivations, right? What was Reuben's motivation for throwing Joseph into the pit?
Oh, he's unconscious.
Why and how?
To say we didn't kill him, we just stopped him.
Okay,
He said he was gonna save them later.
okay, so he said he's gonna send him later.
I think he wanted to become maybe like the second favorite son. Like he'll bring Joseph back to his dad and be like, look, I saved your favorite son.
Okay. Trying to like sneak in there.
I think Reuben was the oldest, so he was gonna get it the worst. Like he's gonna get most blame. Like, why did you take care of this?
Yeah, look at the chart. Reuben is the oldest, right? And the oldest had the birthright, the oldest like had that place of honor, was thought to be a leader. Like, what sort of leader is he going to be to his father, right? If like you let all the brothers kill him with the youngest son. So there's and that's not to say like not everything that everybody said like isn't a part of it, but I do think like his birth position fueled a lot of what he did. Like think of our own positions in birth, right? You're the oldest, you're the middle, you're the brunt. Like wherever you are in the family, like we have different motivations, right? And you always look at like the oldest sibling, like, hey, you had all the rules, right? Second one, bend the rules, right? Third one comes along and says, like, I'm the youngest, like rules don't apply to me, go somewhere else with the rules. Like birth position, plays a part in what we do and why we do it. Okay, so good. So Reuben wanted to say like, no, let's not kill him. Let's put him in the pit because I wanted to go back and save him, right? Probably had to do with birth position, right? What about Judah?
Or someone.
Judah was a businessman. Right? Let's make a buck. What good does that bring? Let's make a buck. Right? So you look at this situation, right? And you see there's so many different motivating factors among everybody involved. And each one affected the trajectory of the events in just a little bit, right? To get the story that unfolded before us. And do you think each individual knows the motivations of everybody? No, they don't. The reason why I bring this up is because and I'm sure you can probably share in this, that sometimes we get into really complicated family situations. And we claim we know everybody's motivation. Right? They did this because they wanted to do that. Right? And we think it's the only factor in the situation. But we didn't go and we didn't ask them. We didn't actually sit down peaceably with them and say, like, okay, why did this happen? What happened over here? Right? And then we're going to talk to this person. Frequently, we jump to a lot of conclusions about why so-and-so did what they did in the situation. And in some situations, okay, it's good for us to ask, it's good for us to understand. But I think this family situation is very, very complex. And from the outside, we read what, maybe 10 verses. And I'm sure there was a lot more that went into this story than we have captured. For them to throw their brothers in the pit, kill him, not kill him. I want to save him later on. Let's just sell him. Like, okay, what are we going to tell dad? Coat, colors, blood, like all this, like, it's so complicated. Like, it's impossible to know everybody's motivation. But it's important to know that in any given complicated situation that like really has negative ripples, there's a lot of motivating factors that we are not aware of. And before we jump to conclusions on what so-and-so's motivation is, or that everybody's out to get me, or that like everybody's black, you know, in this situation, we need to take a step back and appreciate that I just don't know. Right? Joseph probably didn't know that Reuben wanted to save him. He may not have known that like Judah didn't want to kill him, he wanted to make money of him. He didn't know which brother was saying like, okay, let's kill him. That's not like clear in the text. A lot of different motivations. So it's important to always like take a step back. So like, there's a lot I don't know about these situations. And in the same token, look at Joseph's motivation. He was just following instructions from his dad. Who in this situation is looking at our motivations and painting us in a certain way? Who looks at us and says, like, you're the dreamer, right? You're coming to gloat. But inside of us, well, I wasn't coming to gloat. Like, I was just told to do this, right? Very complicated situations. And sometimes when we don't work through them appropriately, we're jettisoned from this journey of just years of not knowing and wrestling with it, which is what Joseph is going to do. And we're really going to like come full circle this at the end of his life, when he, or not at the end of his life, but when the drought comes and the family gets reunited, like, all this like comes rushing up to the surface. Difficult. It's difficult, but we need to take a step back and kind of appreciate that we always know a small slice of the pie in our family situations. And let's not run to conclusions, because we could set us up for a long life of just thinking somebody is a certain way, and they're really not. All right. Let's read 29 through 35.
I can read.
Thank you.
Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brothers and said, "The lad is no more." and I, where shall I go? So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him." Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him.
So Jacob clearly takes the death of Joseph hard. It is like noteworthy to say, okay, Reuben actually isn't in on this. For some reason, which it's not clear to us in scripture, like he was gone for the selling of Joseph. And he comes back and he's like, where'd Joseph go? Right? So he didn't know of the selling, and we're not told, based on scripture, that the other brothers let him in on what they did. Right? And to kind of reinforce the point that we're making earlier, that Reuben was the oldest, like, and he was feeling the weight of being the oldest in this situation. He says, right, the lad is no more, pretty much saying like he's dead, he's gone, and I, where shall I go? He's like, getting kicked out of the house for sure for this, right? So he's not in on it. They dip the tunic in blood and rip it, and they even play like silly with Jacob, saying like, "We found this. Does this look familiar?" Of course, it looked familiar. You guys hated this road, right? If you saw it, and like every time you saw it, it angered you. But yet they play like as if like he's in a strange place, right? That we really didn't notice him, when in reality, they were so annoyed at him that they couldn't not notice it. Right? And they said, "Is this yours? Like we found it. Could be Joseph's. We're not sure. We don't know what happened." Right? So you just see like all these like different motivations coming into this like, family situation that all have their roots from generations back. Right? And then to cap off chapter 37, verse 36. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, and the captain of the guard. All right, so we're just giving a small nugget on where Joseph lands. That's where we will pick up next week. Any last questions, thoughts, observations? Something that's struck.
Was it after Jacob found out Joseph was dead that he went blind?
Jacob was, well, Jacob in his elder age, like he was not seeing well, and I think we see that in the very end when Jacob comes to Egypt and he says, "Joseph, come close because my eyes are bad." But at this point, like we're not told that his eyes are bad.
Just like what we were told is that probably crying too much or just weren't his son. None of this is how his eye condition developed.
Okay. I don't know.
And something I noticed in Joseph is that he wasn't too wise. Like even like that his dreams were true and it was a gift, and he wasn't just making it up to just make his brothers sad, but it was mostly not choosing the right time. Like
Yeah.
he just told him a dream that made him angry, and then he went to tell him another dream.
Sure, he's 17.
Yeah.
He's 17. Like, what 17-year-old doesn't want to feel like on top of the world if you have a dream like that, right? But it's good to point that out because, hey, we see these Bible characters, and like, yes, in the same line, like we're seeing the typology between him and Christ, but he's still a person, right? And he still has his family, and he has all these blessings and curses that have been laid upon him. And as a 17-year-old, are you fully aware of them? No. Even as like, in your later years of life, like we're not always fully aware of the blessing and curses that have been passed down from our families, right? Let alone as But he's now on this journey, which is going to take into his 40s, right? And recovering.
Yeah, and it shows his growth more like in the prison, he still wasn't too wise and he was just trying to get out and ask for different people.
Yeah.
But then the position that he reached shows like how wise and
Yeah,
he's been.
growth over time. Growth is painful. Cool. All right, let's close in prayer. In the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and God, amen. We thank you, Lord, for your blessings this day. Story of Joseph. The Lord, help us to not only reflect on his family, but our own families. I mean, truly, there are blessings and curses, and struggles, and there are great things. And we're a compilation of all of them, whether we're aware of it or not. Help us, Lord, to be in tune with what's happening deep inside our lives and within the generations of our parents. Help us to know our inner self and our tendencies and our good things and bad things. Because Lord, truly, in all the situations of life, we have to navigate them with what we have inside of us. So help us to be aware of it so that we're not driven by the shadows of our lives. And we're able to write new scripts. And Joseph, while he was handed so many negative scripts, he began to write new scripts. And then the chapters that unfold before us in the weeks to come help us to see those scripts and to learn from them and implement them. In the intercession of our saints, hear us as we say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, and forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Gracious are you, Lord, for those who are in